3, 2, 1.
Hey folks, Hal Shurtleff. Welcome to live from Hal's house. Sorry, Daryl Hall, for having to steal that title. Daryl Hall has a program live from Daryl's house. Anyway, I've got a little short presentation, and I've updated. I did just a PowerPoint of a voiceover about a month and a half ago, but there's been some new information about this. It's called Camp Constitution Presents Markers, Monuments, and Cultural Marxism. And I should say, and I should add, Governor Charlie Baker, and CAIR, C-A-I-R. That's the Center for American and Islamic Relations. You say, what's this got to do with it? Well, you'll find out. Next slide, my good man. Okay, before I'm called a neo-Confederate or racist, or I want to bring back slavery and repeal the 13th or 14th Amendments, I have a very proud lineage. My last name is Shurtleff, and you'll see some of these men that were Civil War veterans, members of my family. Nathaniel Bradstreet Shurtleff from Boston, who was killed in the Civil War. I named my son after him. His dad was mayor of Boston. And you see this man right here. This is, this man was a Shurtleff. He died. He was in Louisiana, and he was a Civil War medic. He was starting to be a doctor, and he died as a result of his illnesses that he contracted. This is Fletcher Shurtleff, another Civil War officer. Next slide, please. And then you have Uncle Albert Shurtleff from Carver, Massachusetts, one of the first persons to enlist from Carver. He lost his arm at the Battle of First Bull Run. And then you have, this is the famous, well, not so famous artist, Roswell Moore Shurtleff, who was an officer he was one of the first officers imprisoned in the South, in Richmond, and he was involved with the prisoner exchange. But while he was on duty, it's called the walking the picket line, he was wounded, and the Confederates used the flag he was carrying to dress his wound. So, and this is another Carlton Shurtleff from Brookline, who was also died in the Civil War. And next slide. I think, do I have it? Oh, before that. There's also General Giles Shurtleff. I think there's a little slide here. General Giles Shurtleff organized the first all-black regiment from Ohio. And I visited the town of Oberlin, where there's a statue to honor him. He did survive the war, thankfully. And the statue originally was going to be him giving a weapon to a slave, because he believed very much that blacks should fight for their freedom. And what would have been great if they made it. They didn't do that for some reason. So before you call me a neo-Confederate, I want to point out that I'm very proud of my Yankee heritage. Although there were a couple of Shurtleffs that fought on the Confederate side, I have to mention that. Next slide. Okay, now what you're looking at, this is George's Island in Boston Harbor. You don't see it too well here. Now, during the Civil War, for a couple of years, George's Island was a prisoner of war camp. And in fact, it held, actually, the vice president of the Confederacy was incarcerated there after the Civil War. And about 12 men died, 12 Confederate prisoners of war died at this prison camp. Now, there was a good rapport between the commandant of the camp and the prisoners. In fact, the commandant's son became an officer and went down south to fight. And the officers, the Confederate prisoner officers, actually wrote him a letter saying that he's ever captured, that his captors should treat him very well because his father has treated us very well. So even in wartime, you know, people can have this rapport. This here is a marker. I wouldn't even call it a monument officially. It's a marker that was put there, I think, in 1963 by the Boston chapter of the Daughters of the Confederacy. That chapter is long defunct, although we have a woman in this room that qualifies for that, and maybe she'll get it going again. So this has been there since '63 up until last year. Would have been the spring of 2017 that somebody all of a sudden said, "Oh my goodness, a Confederate memorial! This is horrible! A Confederate monument in Boston! This is horrible, outrageous!" How many people have been to George's Island? I've been to George's Island as a kid. I saw that. I never really think it was evil and horrible. It had nothing to do with forced busing. It had nothing to do with any of the racism that in Boston at all. It was a historic marker. Whether you like the Daughters of the Confederacy or not, well, Charlie Baker, this courageous conservative, he's supposed to be the most popular governor in the world, right? He puts plywood around it initially. What are we going to do with this thing? Well, oh my goodness, we got to cover it up. It's so offensive, right? It's been there over 50 years. He's the same guy that marches in these parades in June that celebrate that riot, the Stonewall riot, with people dressed in sadomasochistic outfits doing horrible things. That's okay, but this is so horrible because it has the names of 12 Confederates or 13 Confederates that died there. Now, since just recently, I've got more information about this. We believe there are 6 of the Confederates that are buried in unmarked graves. And I was talking to a man named Ken on the North Shore, who's probably watching this right now. He's a Facebook friend, and I've met him a few times. And he actually does a lot with veterans' graves. He said, if there are graves there, he said that's a national cemetery, and it should be honored that way. And we have plans to go out there and he knows the names of these men too. So, so they put the plywood on after a month or so, and this past, I think it was last September or August, they removed it to the archives at Colonial Point in storage. I'm surprised they didn't just toss it in the harbor. Now, I've been on the phone with the office of Mike Rush, my state rep, a lot of other people. No one wants to talk about this, right? I went to the governor's office right at the State House. No one wants to say a word about it.
Gutless.
So I actually been in touch with the people at the archive, and I said, if you're not going to put it back, donate it give it to Camp Constitution. We have a place for it. Now, the gentleman, my friend there from the North Shore, said, no, we're going to get it put back there. And by the way, he said George's Island is actually, I thought it was owned by the state. It's actually owned by the city of Boston, which was a little surprise. I didn't know that. And I've read Edward Rose Snow's book on the Boston Harbor Islands. I used to belong to a group called Save Our Shores. So I should have known that, but I didn't.
So Charlie Baker doesn't have any
So
authority.
let's go to the next slide. Exactly. He's violating federal law, by the way. Okay. The prison camp, okay, I already read, so let me just read. The prison camp had a reputation for humane treatment of its detainees. When the camp commander's son, Lieutenant Justin Dimmick, left Fort Warren for active duty in the field with the 2nd U.S. Artillery, he was given a letter from Confederate officers in the camp urging good care should he be captured. He was later mortally wounded at the Battle of Chancellorsville, unfortunately. So, next slide. Now, CAIR, which is Council on American and Islamic Relations. Now, we are told that these people that support CAIR, they're conservatives. They're probably even good Republicans, right? They're pro-life, they stand up for moral values. Really? They are totally in favor of removing all of the markers. Now, they say here, removal of Confederate memorials nationwide, a fitting response to terror attack on anti-racist rally. They want to remove every vestige of our history. And you know what's interesting? Dr. Duke Pesta made an interesting comment recently. He said, of all the nations of the world, we're not afraid to talk about the negative stuff in our country, the racism, the anti-Semitism, how the American Indians were treated. He said, you go to Japan, you can learn about the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they don't talk about Pearl Harbor. They don't talk about how there are people pillage and rape people in the Philippines or Nanking in China and these other places, right? So we have a pretty good track record of getting, the dirty laundry as well as the clean laundry, right? But these people, they're not going to stop with a little marker on George's Island or a statue of Robert E. Lee. Mark my words. Next slide, please. Now, a little bit about the Daughters of Confederacy. They are considered today a patriotic American organization. They don't want to respond to anything. They're sort of being quiet about it. They said, like the monuments, we're quiet, we're silent. But the lady here, who's now the president, she said that we deeply regret that racists who use the Confederate symbols as a sign of racism. We want nothing to do with them. They were founded in the late 1890s, and yet there may have been some racists involved, that group way back then. There may have been some segregationists. By the way, Democrat Boston is, you look at the history of Boston, the liberal Democrats, and racism, it kind of dovetailed, okay, and I won't go into that too much, right? So the idea that it was just the South that had racist views is not the case whatsoever. So their sons, the sons of the Confederates, or grandsons, fought in World War I. Their great-grandsons fought in World War II, and as Tom pointed out, we may not have won World War II. Weren't for all of these Southern boys, right? Even today, most of the military is right, and the war is over. Abraham Lincoln said, let's bind the wounds together, right? But we should not forget our history. We should not put history under Orwellian memory hole, and that's what Baker's doing. That's what these people are doing. So next slide, please. Yeah, this is the statement the president made of the DAR, of the Daughters of the Confederacy. They're headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, by the way. And they had a chapter up here. You know, a lot of the Southerners were, they call it reverse carpetbagging. You know, the South was devastated financially. So the war's over. Where do you go? You go to New York and Boston, where the jobs are. And there actually was a New York chapter of the Daughters of the Confederacy. They probably had chapters in all of the northern states.
Montana.
Was it?
Montana.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so I suggest you visit their website. Just see how wicked and evil they are. Next slide, please. That's more of the Daughters of the Confederacy. Next slide. Okay, now you skipped one. Go back. One more. Go back. Okay, now Elmira, New York. Oh my goodness, there's a Confederate monument there. Oh heavens, where's Mario Como? Rip this thing down, put plywood around it. Well, I took a trip to this cemetery. These pictures I got while I was there. Had my son Nathaniel and my daughter Georgia. We were on our way to Jamestown to the Lucille Ball Museum, and we stopped off. Actually, no, that was in the wintertime, so this was a picture I got online. There was a notorious Union prisoner of war camp, which you don't read about in your Yankee history books for some reason. You read about Andersonville and how horrible that was, but you don't read about how horrible Elmira was, or Rock Island, Illinois, or the camp they had in Columbus, Ohio, where they had like 50% casualties. All of these markers, all these gravestones, are men who died there, and they had plenty of food. Why so many died? Nobody's sure. Over 2,000 people, maybe more than that, died at this camp. And this is a Confederate soldier, looking mournful about the loss of his. Next slide, please. Now, this was a runaway slave, John Jones, who was in charge of the burial detail. Now, if anyone had a bone to pick with these horrible Confederates, it would have been a former slave, right? What was his duty here at Elmira? To bury these men with Christian dignity and make sure that their loved ones were notified. And I think all but a handful were identified. And his house is right across the street, and there's a little museum. It just opened up, I think it was like a year after we got there, about 3 years ago. So this man didn't have any hatred for these people. He had compassion for them. So don't you think that, but if we go back now, go back 2 slides. If we're going to be consistent with our cultural Marxism, shouldn't we just rip this down? Come on, Mario Como. New York is those left-wing as Massachusetts. Okay.
Don't give them any ideas.
Oh, I'm sure they don't. They know what's there, Tom. I know what you're saying. Next slide. Okay, so we already discussed that, so we'll keep going that. Now, let's back up history a little bit longer here. Now, Concord Bridge in Concord, Massachusetts. There's the famous Concord Bridge. It's not the original one. Right on the, is it the north side of the bridge? You see this little marker. Graves of British soldiers that died there, okay? Now, if we're going to be true, let's rip these things down too. They were the enemy, right?
Right.
But we're not enemies anymore, right?
Oh.
And so, I'm okay with this. I don't think we should rip this down, but the cultural Marxists, they should probably say, hey, this got to go. Next slide. This is in Lexington. The grave of a British soldier wounded April 19th, died in Buckman Tavern. They don't even know his name. But they buried, and every year, there's a delegate from, I guess, the British consul.
Yes.
They pay respects, and the Minutemen, the militia group, the ceremonial group, they pay respects. They honor him. Should we rip this down too? If we're going to be consistent with our cultural Marxism, let's tear this one down. Next slide, please. Well, how about this one? This is this is what they call a bas relief, the 54th Regiment, led by a white officer. And all blacks, the officers are all white, but the NCOs and the enlisted men were all black.
Gus St. Gaudens.
Yes, isn't that segregation? Oh, and there's an angel on the statue. Oh my goodness, that has a godly concept. And on the back, there's a Bible verse.
Oh.
So this, in fact, they're talking about this one's coming down.
Oh, yeah, goodness.
In fact, the Antifa people, when they had that horrible, ugly rally there in August, they were defacing it. They've actually did some damage to it.
So the ones that are throwing the water balloons, except they weren't filled with water.
So the average person looks at this, and there's something beautiful. These courageous black men that risked their lives. They were promised the same salary as white men, and they would not give it to them originally. And they said, you know what, we're not taking any money until we get the full amount. So they had a group called there was a Colored Ladies Relief Society. A lot of other white people, what have you, helped keep these men in the field. They took heavy casualties, And this man lost his life at South Carolina, Fort Wagner.
Robert Gould Shaw from here in West
That's
Roxbury, by
right,
the way.
and he was there's a school right down the street,
Yeah.
and he actually was both he and Nathaniel Bradstreet Shurtleff were contemporaries. They graduated from Harvard within a few years of each other. So if we're going to be consistent, Charlie Baker, this has to come down. And you see this if you ever walk in the front, the front of the State House. You can't miss this. So I'm not advocating we take it down, by the way. Next slide. I think
Augustus Rodin, the French sculptor, very critical of Americans.
Yeah.
He loved that particular sculpture. Yeah.
And that sculpture, anyway, that was done by Augustus Godin. He's the guy that did the famous $20 gold piece. Yeah, which is one of the prettiest coins, I think. So in 1898, President McKinley, every soldier's grave made during our unfortunate Civil War is a tribute to American valor. And when those graves were made, we differed widely about the future of this government. Those differences were long ago settled by the arbitrament of arms. And the time has come in the evolution of sentiment and feelings under the providence of God, when in the spirit of fraternity we should share with you in the care of the graves of the Confederate soldiers. So they did pass a law. I don't remember the exact law, but the Confederate graves are considered national cemeteries. Next, I think this is that's it. So there's going to be more. We're going to do some follow-up here. I'm going to take a trip to George's Island to do a little more research, and there's talk about having a press conference. So please, if you're watching this either on YouTube or Facebook, if you want to be more, contact us. Visit our website. You can go right to our website and you can ask to be contacted. We can let you know when we're going to have these events. And if you've got something just going on in your town, let us know. There's something happening. There was a statue down in New Jersey of the not the Hungarian, the massacre, the Katyn Woods massacre. They initially blamed it on the Nazis, but it was the communists and the Stalin that killed about 10 to 15,000 of the top leaders of Poland. They wanted to remove that statue too. There's a statue in downtown Boston of the Hungarian uprising. Don't tell anybody where it is, because that will come next. See, so it's not about a little marker on a little island in Boston. It's part of the warfare, the cultural Marxism. And that's a really interesting topic in itself. We talk about the Frankfurt School in Germany. There's a man named Antonio Gramsci. He was the Italian Communist Party theoretician. He was put in jail under Mussolini. He died in prison. And basically his idea wasn't a violent revolution, execute people, put them in concentration camps, but you capture their minds. You go through the institutions, the corporations, and that's what's happened, folks. You can have the best person in the White House, you can have some great people in Congress, you can even have a few good legislators here and there, but if the institutions and the bureaucrats are run by these people, it's going to happen. So that's why we have to put a stop to this as quickly as we can. And again, contact us on Facebook if you want to be notified as time goes on. And with that, I want to thank you and good night.
CampConstitution.net.
CampConstitution.net is our website. Yeah. And yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
I hope
And